My Lords, the government says that it's a law and order party, and I think it's important to recognise that law and order requires that when Parliament makes criminal laws and sets out clear rules, that the public themselves can decide whether they're going to be on the side of law and order or they're going to be on the side of criminality. But that requires that the laws that are introduced are proportional and have clarity. Any member of the public needs to know if they're breaking the law so that they won't be labelled a criminal. But I think in this whole group of new amendments, there's really no clear guidance, for example, on what's a reasonable excuse, or in the earlier set of amendments, the ought to know clause completely, I thought, made it clear that one might not know. Reasonable excuse is used as though one is guilty already and need to give a good excuse for a perfectly reasonable legal activity that's now treated with suspicious, and the legal burden of proof is on the defence, whereas it should be a burden on the prosecution. At committee stage, when asked about the reasonable excuse, or what reasonable excuse one might use for carrying a bicycle lock if it could be seen as potentially preparation for locking on, Baroness Williams said that it is a defence for a person to prove that they had a reasonable excuse for carrying the equipment in question. For example, carrying a bike lock for the purpose of locking one's bike to a designated space for bikes would be considered a reasonable excuse. And it struck me then that this is a situation whereby we have to explain to the authorities that, in fact, we are just carrying a bike lock and that we might want to lock our bike up. And we had to explain that, no, we weren't the type of person who might misuse our bike lock, which, to be honest with you, is no business of the police, the government, the authorities. And it seems alarming that people will need to have reasonable excuses for carrying out peaceful and lawful actions in order to avoid, potentially, prison terms. This is the micromanagement of what is considered to be the right kind of protest when the government claims that it's not attacking protests. I'd like to counter some of the arguments that have been used by the people that I am broadly on the side of. I know that this side wants us all to not debate, but I'm going to carry on. For a moment, I want to get to the vote. I'm trying to win a vote. It's allowed. Just let me get on with it. The point I wanted to make was, this is not whether we think that there's a climate emergency or not. This is not about what side you're on particular demonstrations. There are some people on this side who maybe think that the people who are labelled anti-vaxxers shouldn't be allowed to have demonstrations. But what I think is that we have to be careful about picking and choosing which protests we want. The proposals increase criminal liability without the need of knowledge of wrongdoing for a whole range of people who might just want to express a different political opinion, which I still think is what debate and protest is all about. And if you don't have the knowledge of the wrongdoing in that way, peaceful protests will be criminalised, and that will have a chilling effect on the right to protest. So I think the government is saying it's doing something in terms of law and order, but it's actually inadvertently criminalising all sorts of innocent people, whether it likes it or not, and that will damage the right to protest.